Hello and welcome back to Talkin Design Down Under, and I am Keith D. Franks III with the Australian Tabletop Gaming Network, and joined with me today is special guest Jonathan Calleja. Say hello.
How are you doing, Keith?
I'm doing well. This is our third episode, and it feels like we're actually getting to the meat of some things, I guess. But so we can get everybody familiar with you, how did you get started in your interest in board games?
Well, how far do you want to go back? Because it's a long trip if you want to go the whole way.
Pick a defining moment where you were like, you know what, board games are rad and video games suck.
Okay, well, it probably started with my various card collections. So when I was really young, I was into Pokemon cards because they were the thing in the school ground. Mm-hmm. But then I didn't really have anyone to play Pokemon with. So then Yu-Gi-Oh came out, and I tried that because people were collecting Yu-Gi-Oh and seemed to kind of know the game. And that was enjoyable, but still, like, people didn't really take it seriously. It wasn't until I got to high school where I found some people who played Yu-Gi-Oh that actually wanted to play it seriously, that I started getting into the game. And then after that, I got into Magic, and Magic was a slippery slope that led to board games.
I had a similar problem.
Yeah, and Magic's really cool. And before I had discovered Magic, I didn't really know about many other cool board games. Mm-hmm. But then after that, I was introduced to Settlers of Catan.
Yeah,
and that was
fantastic gateway game.
Yeah, that was eye-opening because most of the games I played before were like Scrabble. Or Monopoly. And before Settlers of Catan, my favorite game was Cluedo. But I would lose at Cluedo so bad. Except for chess. Chess is just like such a good game. Yeah. But because it's such a classic, it's like some people don't really consider classical music to be like popular music, even though there's a huge number of people who really appreciate it. It's its own sort of thing. So I kind of feel like chess is the classical music of the board game world.
Yeah, and there's a big division between modern board games, which we see mostly released through Kickstarter, and even just retail board gaming over the last 10 years has been a huge divergence between the two of them. It's very interesting to see something so abstract and stark, like chess still being a huge seller, when we have all these huge, complicated, probably same strategic level, number of pieces, all that kind of stuff, blowing up on Kickstarter in the same way.
Exactly. Anyway, to jump forward to how I started designing games, when I got into Magic, I played Magic for about 3 months and thought, there's things that are going on here that are cool, but I really like chess, how can I fuse these two? I made my first board game, which I called Energy, which was not terrible, but it was also not brilliant. The biggest problem, this is my first design lesson, is don't design games where players have to make too many decisions. Okay. In this game, I made this board and people had cards in their hand, and I had all of the complexity of Magic and all of the complexity of chess. And you had to choose a card in your hand, figure out how you're going to play it on the board, and then figure out how you're going to build a strategy to attack your opponent. And you had to do that with like 7 cards in your hand. And my God, I was the designer and I was getting brain burn. So lesson number 1 came from that game. But then when I went to uni, I did a graphic design course and I did a marketing minor. And in that marketing minor, I was brought into how do you design a product for an audience? And I thought, well, I kind of know what nerds are like. I kind of know things that they don't do very well. And there are so many of them that just don't know how to socialize. So I designed a dating card game, which also gave me a bunch of other experiences. But that was when I started taking, when I sort of connected that you could make a board game and turn it into a real product and people might actually buy it. That's a huge step to make. Yeah. So I suppose I started taking games seriously then, but I wouldn't say that I achieved any sort of success making board games until I became the art director and graphic designer for Scofton.
Yeah, which is pretty recent.
It was the first Kickstarter this first game that I've worked on Kickstarter, where I actually worked on the game design, and that's been successful.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty huge thing for me. But I've got a number of other games in my backlog that one day they will turn into products, I hope.
So while we've mentioned Scofton, let's talk about the jump from working on solo projects, like all these little bits you've tinkered on so far, to working with a team of people. Because I believe Vamoose Co is 3, including you.
That's correct.
So what's that like, being able to share? Because obviously you weren't the solo designer, you had a lot of other people that you had input with as well.
Yeah, and to get into this, I started attending the Incubator Melbourne playtesting group because I wanted to test my dating card game called Romantanova. And the first session I went to was the first session that they had held in a new venue. And it was still really new. And I got halfway through explaining the rules, and it took 30 minutes, and people destroyed me. Like, I felt like crying.
You rocked up to Shark Tank when you thought it was just a friendly hangout.
Well, yeah, not only that, but when you design, so this is design lesson number 2. When you design a potentially sensitive game, be ready for sensitive people to give you harsh criticism. And this is not what I was prepared for, because at the time, I was young and naive. I was like 22, and first game, it was about dating. I thought people would be like, oh, this is cool, it'll be fun. And I was slaughtered because half of these people were like, so why did you choose to use stereotypes and in this thing when they could potentially be offensive? And I was like, because they're relatable, and people would be like, I don't want to relate to that. And it was harsh, man. It was harsh.
It's actually funny, we still see a lot of that in a lot of board game design now, and people really haven't learned that lesson.
Yeah, well, I think this is now design takeaway number 3 is when you play test, be willing to control the play test. So if someone asks about a point that you don't want to clarify at that moment, kindly say, look, that's a really good point, but I'll answer that later. I just need to go through this at the moment.
Yeah,
so you
or
can
take
see
notes.
the full idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to control your playtest. Your players are there to give you information, but you are also totally responsible for where you lead your players. So design lesson number 3. But anyway, because I joined this incubator these sessions, and this playtest had gone horribly wrong, I decided to work on a new game, and I iterated it multiple times. I got to know the scene, I met up with people, and I found Gavin and Marcus, before they had made Vamoose Co, did this beautifully handcrafted game. And I thought to myself, wow, these guys really appreciate the art of making games. And at the time, they were playing this game called Damn Beavers. Which
that's right, I remember Damn Beavers.
Yeah, so no one is probably ever going to see Damn Beavers. And it's kind of upsetting because they worked on it for like 9 years before they got it to the board game scene, like to actually try and produce it. And they went to 80 different publishers, and all of those publishers said, wow, you've got a beautiful game, but we have no idea how we're going to market this. We don't think there's an audience, and sorry, we're not going to publish this game for you. And that 80 publishers is a lot.
Is a lot. I don't think I could name 10, let alone 80.
And that's why they called their company Vamoose, because they had been told to vamoose so many times. So yeah, they have a sense of humor. But when I saw their game and saw their commitment to making a really good game, I joined another playtesting group, which was run by Gavin, called Tabletop Playtesters in Preston, which was a really great, small, intimate playtesting experience held in like his shed.
Yeah.
And it was good because it was his friends and other game designers coming, and because it's such a small number of people, you can really get into the meat of the feedback, and you can test a few games and really like play them in a setting that's closer to what you might expect your consumer to be in. Like when you have like 30 people from one big playtesting session all playing different games together, it's not the same as when you have just like 4 or 5 people in it in the same room playtesting it more close, like in a more close environment as your consumers would. So it was a special, intimate sort of a playtesting thing, and we had lots of different designers bring their game in, and we'd have different people play it, and it was good because you had like players and game designers giving feedback. But they came up with this idea for a game called Scofton after joking about how funny it would be to have an all-you-can-eat buffet board game.
Yeah.
And at first they thought it was just a joke, but Marcus went back and basically found out that the game kind of wrote itself, and he designed all the mechanics. And the next time I played it with them, I was amazed. I thought the game was really good. And when they found out that I was a graphic designer, they went, well, this guy seems kind of cool. He's got the skill set that we need, and they approached me.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I got into doing game design for board games.
Okay.
And graphic design.
So I have 2 very important questions about Scofton. The first one is, who's specifically responsible for the Sneeple, the greatest board game component of all time?
Wow, that's a compliment and a half. Okay. I would say it's the combination of Gavin and Marcus.
Okay.
Because Gavin had the idea going, oh man, how hilarious would it be for someone to sneeze on the food, and then you would be the only person who could eat it. And we all laughed at this and thought it was just a funny idea. And then Marcus went and said, well, now he had like a little piece of paper that had sneeze written on it. And he's like, yeah, this is your sneeze. You can sneeze on things now. And then Gavin took that another step and designed the shape of what the sneeze should look like.
Yeah.
And that actually took you wouldn't think that designing a sneeze would take so much work, but there was I think it was about 10 or 15 minutes of discussion of what a sneeze should look like.
The exact spray pattern of a person's sneeze.
Exactly. So, and how big it should be. Anyway, so that happened. And so I really say it's a team effort between Gavin and Marcus.
Okay.
I didn't really have much to do with it in terms of the sneeze, but in terms of how the rest of the game looked, I did quite a lot to uplift it.
Yeah. All right, you ready for the second part of this?
Oh, yeah.
I want to talk about Scofton Gate. And this was something that was very interesting that happened either just before or during the Kickstarter, where there was this big awards thing where anyone could submit any game. And Scofton got submitted, and a bunch of people voted for it, and it got nominated, and everyone complained about it, despite the fact that I did the exact same thing. My game, Spirits of Carter Mansion, was suggested. I suggested somebody to put it up as a joke, and they did it, and all the people from ATGM voted for it, and it got picked as well. But somehow, Scofton had all this negative press come their way, and everyone kind of ignored me about it. So I'm curious as to how you feel like they zeroed in on you, and if that did actually raise the profile of the game or not.
Okay, so part of why Scofton Gate got a little bit big is because we didn't bring it up. Someone else did. We don't know who it was, and we publicized the fact that our game, which wasn't even invented, was put up for an award. Yeah. And we thought this was hilarious. And it kind of got traction because we gave it traction. And then we used that as a point to talk about for reviewers and other people. So we kind of used it to our advantage. So I suppose you could say it was leverage.
Okay.
But it was kind of, because the game has such interesting artwork, and like Scofton is a game about a pretty terrible all-you-can-eat buffet restaurant, because, you know, everyone has that bad buffet experience where the food wasn't heated just right and someone got food poisoning, or someone invited their kids and they've thrown food across the room, or something's gone wrong. And so Scofton quite deliberately had a very tongue-in-cheek art style, which was a sort of Simpsons-esque comic style.
Yeah.
And because the game had that art style, I don't think people took it seriously.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which is another reason why when it got put up for an award, it sort of stuck out.
It rubs a few people the wrong way. How dare this not very serious game be in the same category for award as blah blah blah, this other thing, which I think is fantastic.
Exactly, and so like from first glance, you're like, what the hell is this stupid game?
Yeah.
But that's the thing I like about Scofton. It's cute, and it's a bit weird, and it makes a statement in a kind of humble way by being true to its grossness. So yeah, but we used this, and we used the fact that Scofton was nominated as a way to promote the game, but also to call out the fact that this award system was a little bit bogus.
Well, it was. There was no submission requirements. You could literally put anything in there. I had a game that was actually able to be added, Castles of Calleja, which would have fit whatever the submission guidelines would have supposed to be. But instead I was like, haha, let's put up my latest thing as a way to actually get press. And then I kind of just didn't push it as hard as you guys did. And it was interesting for everyone to be like, wow, haha, look at what's happening here, you know?
And at the time, we were using Facebook and Twitter to promote ourselves. And Gavin had been working really hard trying to make friends on Twitter. And when you have some sort of conspiracy or something else that's just a bit off going on Twitter, bam, it's like a fire, man. People just get on it. If it's not right, someone on Twitter is going to yell about it. So it was just a good sort of the right thing at the right time for the right place.
Yeah. So while you mentioned people yelling about things, I wanted to get a chance to talk to you about player psychology, which I understand, and from the reading material you sent me, is something that you've spent a lot of time thinking about and writing about as well. So why don't you get me started on what makes this an important part of designing a board game?
Well, like, player psychology is about understanding your players. And, you know, everyone wants to design a game, but like, how do you know that you're designing a game that players are going to like? Yeah. And to me, the easiest and quickest way of figuring that is by asking, what do people find fun?
So surveying, basically.
Pardon?
So by surveying, basically.
Well, not necessarily. Sometimes it's philosophical, other times it's logical, and other times it's, literally a survey. One of my proudest moments as a new game designer was coming up with a killer survey, which gave me like data that let me figure out if my games had actually improved between playtests. So I was pretty happy with that.
Okay.
And I knew when the numbers were going up that I was legitimately making the small changes I was making were having a big difference. Anyway, onto some game design specifics about player psychology. Look, if for anyone who's new to this topic, there are two models you've got to look into with player psychology. One is the Barter model of player psychology, Bartle. That's looking at usually single player games, and they go over 4 different player psychographic profiles, which is killers, achievers, explorers, and socializers. So if anyone doesn't know what a psychographic profile is, it's when you try and figure out who is likely to fit into a category based on what they like. So in the Bartle model, killers like winning games, achievers like getting achievements, explorers like finding content, and socializers like doing things that they can talk about. And for a video game, it works really well. And Mark Rosewater, the current head designer of Magic and has been doing this sort of thing for ages, has his own system, which has Jimmy, Spike, and someone else.
Johnny.
You know, which one?
Johnny.
Yeah, Johnny as well. I should know that. I'm Jonathan. I should know. Anyway, they have their own. He has his own versions that are kind of similar, but where I find player psychology really interesting is when you have games that have more than 2 players. So Bartle is a great single player model. Mark Rosewater makes a fantastic 2-player model. But when you have 3 or more players, you have another layer of game.
Well, yeah, both of those models don't cover any kind of cooperative game either.
Yeah.
And that's a big corner of it as well.
Exactly. I like to break, when you have 3 or more players, you have a political element. And so these models don't break down into playing the game and playing the players. And everybody had fun and I had fun. So if you imagine this on sort of like a graph, you have interacting with the game on one end, and on the other end you have interacting with people. And then if you so that would be your y-axis, and then on your x-axis, which is like horizontal, on the right you have like I had fun, and on the left you have everyone had fun. And when you start thinking about this sort of a graph and this sort of model, there's a huge number of different personalities and psychographic profiles that come in. And this is where, in my opinion, board games rule. In a board game, you could let's take Settlers of Catan, for example. There are a number of psychographic profiles that fit into Settlers of Catan. I'm just going to run through 3 to explain what's going on, but there's so many. I'm happy to give you guys an article about this later that your viewers can read. But essentially, I'm going to talk about dictators, mad scientists, and contributors.
Okay.
So in Settlers of Catan, there's 5 different kinds of resources, and the aim of the game is to try and get as many victory points as you can by using these resources to build roads or settlements or whatever to get victory points. Usually each settlement's worth 1 victory point, but if you build a really long road or you get a bunch of knights, you can win extra points in other ways. And if you level up your settlements to like cities, then they're worth additional points. Traditionally, when you play the game in, say, the Bartle model or the Rosewater model, you might only say that, say, killers or spikes, if you're going by them, their aim is to win the game as quickly as possible in the most horrible, uninteresting, not helping everyone way possible. And if you played Settlers of Catan this way, it would be really uninteresting.
Well, there would be no trading for a start, and I feel like everyone would not really branch out that far unless if they were directly trying to block each other.
Exactly. But when you play Settlers of Catan, usually there's a bunch of different people don't use that strategy. So there are some people who play Settlers of Catan and love playing it because they can be a contributor. So I define a contributor as someone who doesn't care about how the game actually ends up. What they care most about is that everybody has fun and that they have had an enjoyable time interacting with people. So a contributor might just be someone who is willing to trade with everyone and gets a kick out of the fact that someone has agreed to trade with them. And so that could be one psychographic profile. And you might be able to design a game, for example, a Euro game, that can really make contributors feel really good, especially if you create an incentive to reward trade. So that can be or an incentive to help other people. The more you help other people, the better you benefit. So because board games are so multiplayer, you can do things like that, which you couldn't do as much in, say, Magic, unless of course you consider other formats of Magic like Commander where more than 3 players play. Anyway, contributor is the first one I want to talk about. The second one is a dictator. So the psychographic profile of a dictator is they believe that everyone is going to have the most fun when they're following the rules and the best strategy.
Yeah, the quarterback. We're often accused of quarterbacking in games like Pandemic. We have that one person that's kind of figured out what they're doing and is therefore trying to tell everyone exactly how and what they should be doing.
For some people, they honestly are doing this because they want everyone to have fun, but they also want everybody to play the game as best as they can, because to them, playing the game is really important and playing it properly is really important. And they might not even, inside, they might be hungering for a challenge. And so they want you desperately to do the best possible move. And they want you to learn what the best possible move is. But they can't, and they want to do that because they want everybody to learn the depth and amazingness of this game, and they just want to share that with you. They don't actually care if they win or not. They just want you to feel the richness that they feel. But ultimately, the downside to dictators is that they end up controlling your game. So if you recognize that you're being a dictator, maybe note that, take a step back, and see how you can make players recognize what the best move is without telling them to do it. And the final psychographic profile I want to talk about is possibly my favorite, and it's called the mad scientist. So in the case of Settlers of Catan, a lot of people recognize that they're not going to win the game, but they will do something hilarious which will let them achieve their own internal winning condition, often to the frustration of others. Usually in games that I've played, someone gets all of the sheep in the game and then calls themselves the shepherd or something like that, and then says, "I am the shepherd and you are my sheep. Whoever wants sheep, they must come to me and I will warmly receive them." And the whole idea is to make it an experience that's a bit silly. It adds another fun element to the game that isn't actually like trying to win, but you're playing the game to win your own agenda. And like the great thing about Settlers of Catan is that each of the different resources can be like, I am the bread maker because I'm making all the wheat, or I'm the builder because I'm collecting all the bricks. Or you could just be, I'm boring because I've got the ore, etc. Like
I'm boring because I have all the VP.
yeah. And the mad scientist character tries to make the game fun for themselves by making their own agenda, and in a way that kind of makes it more hilarious as a story for other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so many different other psychographic profiles that you can think about in multiplayer games, and that's why I like designing board games, because you can look at all of these different characteristics and go, how can I make a game for you?
So which one do you believe most accurately represents you? Got him.
That's a hard one.
While you're thinking, I can go first if you wish.
To do that, do you mean only out of dictator, contributor, and mad scientist?
It doesn't have to be those three. I'm okay with you using the Rosewater or the Bartle ones.
Okay. Rosewater, I'm a Johnny.
Okay.
Bartle, I'm an achiever or a killer. And in my version, I'm a dictator.
Okay.
I'm an absolute dictator. But the thing is, like, I'm a softened dictator, so like I know now, like what my aim now is to try and tell people the rules and to try and get them to understand the rules. So I might stop someone from from doing a particular action and be like, just a reminder, the rules say that this is possible.
Yeah, so, that comes from running a lot of playtests. I found when you're mostly the person teaching a lot of games, you'll find yourself slipping into that role most easily. I found that in most games, video games as well, I am the explorer, and I get the most out of gaming when I feel like I'm learning and improving. That might be having a particularly good chess game where I learnt a new strategy, or playing something competitively that allows me to rank up because I feel like my skills have increased, or being inspired by something else in order to be able to create my own board game version of it from. And we're actually running a little over time, so can you tell us some places where we can find your work and we can follow you along?
Yes. Okay. So you can go to vamoosco.com, which is where you can see the games that Vamoose has made, or you can go to Scofton. Well, you can go to the Kickstarter website and look for Scofton, and any project that comes up with that name, you'll see my work. But if you also want to see some of the other stuff I can do, I highly recommend just joining in on the Incubator Melbourne Facebook group and also online gaming session. And you can play games with me on a Wednesday night in their playtesting sessions. There's also that feedback form that I was really, really impressed with is actually in the files of the Incubator Melbourne Facebook group, so you can just download it. It's free for anyone. Yeah, so I highly recommend doing that. And what I will say though is I want to ask your listeners one of the questions from that feedback form that I think is really useful.
Okay, go for it.
I want you as a player to ask yourself this question, and it will reveal to you what sort of a player you are. You need to place in the order of importance these 6 things. I won the game. I beat my rival. I beat my personal best. Everyone had fun. I made the most exciting play, or I made the game as fun as I could for me. When you can number those between 1 to 6, I can guarantee you can take that to any game store, show it to someone, and they will be able to find you a game you love. Because when they understand what your priorities for fun are, they'll be able to point you in front of games which are going to achieve those. And as a game designer, to me, and figuring out how I can make a game achieve one of those things for someone is crucial to my design process.
All right, sounds good. And thanks again for coming along and having a chat with us today, Jonathan. Hopefully we'll get you back on soon to get a deeper dive into player psychology, because I know we're both very excited about that.
It's been a pleasure, Keith, and sorry for going over time, but I'm just so passionate.
It's all right, it's allowed. All right, thanks again, and thanks everybody for watching along. Make sure you go and check out in the description where you can find Jonathan and his work, and check out those forums. Get involved with the incubator scene, because it is a great way to connect with other creators.